She walked into his office with a resignation letter and walked out with a target on her back. 4 years. She gave him 4 years of her life, her brilliance, her loyalty, her silence. She managed his empire, protected his secrets, and buried her heart so deep she almost forgot it existed. Tonight, she tried to leave. He locked the door. And everything she spent 4 years running from came rushing back in a single, terrifying moment. This is the story of a woman who thought she was invisible, until the most dangerous man in Chicago decided she was the only thing worth keeping. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. But the resignation letter had been in her desk drawer for 11 days. Vivian Hartwell had written it, rewritten it, printed 4 separate versions, and destroyed 3 of them. The 4th was the one she kept. 1 page, clean margins. Formal language that gave nothing away. No bitterness, no confession, no trace of the 4 years she had spent standing beside Roman Devereaux while her chest quietly cracked open like old concrete under a freeze. She'd chosen a Thursday night to do it. Not Monday. Mondays were operational debriefs, and Roman was already wound tight by 7 a.m. Not Friday. Friday evenings meant post-negotiation tension, liquor in the conference room, men with weapons and short fuses moving through the building. Thursday was the quietest night in the rotation. The building thinned out. The guards shifted. Roman usually stayed late finishing reports, and the floor above the main operations hub would be mostly empty by 9. Vivian had counted on that. She had not counted on the storm. It came in off Lake Michigan without much warning, the kind of late October storm that Chicago produced like a personal threat, sky dropping fast, temperature crashing 15 degrees in an hour. By the time she stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor, rain was already hammering the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the outer office, the city lights below dissolving into smeared gold and red through the water. The building swayed almost imperceptibly. In 4 years working here, she had learned to feel it, the subtle flex of the structure under a hard wind, like the whole tower was breathing. She stood for a moment outside the double doors of Roman's private office and listened. His voice, low and controlled, carrying through 2 inches of solid mahogany. He was on a call. She could tell by the rhythm, longer pauses, fewer words. When Roman was in a room with men, he talked differently, faster, more precise. On a call he paced, and you could hear the cadence of his thinking in the silences. Vivian waited. She had her badge clipped to her lapel, her bag on her shoulder, and the letter folded once inside the front pocket of her blazer. She dressed carefully tonight. Not formally, not in a way that announced anything. Dark slacks, a gray blazer, the kind of clothes she wore on days when the office ran long and she might be called into a last-minute meeting. Unremarkable. She had spent 4 years learning to be unremarkable. It was one of her most useful skills. The call ended. She heard the quiet click of a phone being set down on glass. She knocked twice. "Come in." Roman Devereaux was standing at the windows when she opened the door, hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the storm-soaked city. He didn't turn immediately. He rarely did. It was something she'd cataloged in the early months of working for him. The way he made people wait, not out of deliberate cruelty, but out of genuine indifference to the social mechanics that governed everyone else. He operated on his own time signature and expected the world to adjust. He was 41 years old, 6'2", built through years of fighting before the empire and discipline after it. Dark hair going silver at the temples now, something he ignored with the same casual contempt he extended to most things he couldn't control. He wore a charcoal suit jacket over a black shirt, collar open, no tie. He'd pulled it off somewhere around 8 and hadn't bothered to put it back. There was a glass of bourbon on the desk, mostly untouched. There was always a glass of bourbon on the desk after 9 p.m. She'd learned not to read anything into it. "Vivian?" He turned finally, reading her the way he read rooms, quickly, thoroughly, without expression. "It's late." "I know. You're not on the schedule." "No." His eyes moved over her, not in a predatory way, in a precise way. Roman Devereaux noticed everything. It was one of the qualities that had made him impossible to work for and equally impossible to leave. He cataloged people the way a security system cataloged movement, motion, angle, speed, deviation from baseline. Vivian had learned to regulate her baseline years ago. Tonight, she wasn't sure it was holding. "Something happened," he said. "It wasn't a question. I need to give you something." She crossed the office. The carpet swallowed her footsteps. Everything in this room was built to swallow sound. Thick rugs, heavy drapes framing the glass, bookshelves lining two walls that held actual books, not decorative ones. Roman read. That had surprised her in the beginning. She shouldn't have been surprised. She placed the letter on his desk without ceremony. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. "What is this?" "My resignation." The word landed in the room and sat there. Rain hammered the glass behind him. The city lights blurred and shivered through the storm water. Roman's face did not change. That was the thing about him that had always frightened her most. Not the anger which she had seen and survived, but the absolute stillness that preceded it. The way his expression simply closed, like a door being shut from the inside. He picked up the letter. He read it slowly. She watched his eyes track each line without hurry, and she stood with her hands at her sides and her breathing controlled, and her heart doing something irregular and unprofessional against her ribs. He set it back down. "No," he said. She had prepared for this. She'd run through the conversation 40 times in her head, scripted her responses, anticipated his objections. She was exceptionally good at preparing for difficult conversations. It was why he paid her what he paid her. It was why she had lasted 4 years in a position that had burned through 2 predecessors before her. "Roman." "No." He said it the same way, flat, final. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand." He looked at her. "Sit down, Vivian." She sat. He didn't. He walked around the desk and she tracked the movement in her peripheral vision, keeping her face forward, her spine straight, her hands settled on her knees. He moved to the door of the office and she heard the sound she had been dreading before she understood what it was. The lock, a clean mechanical click. His hand still resting against the door for a moment, then dropping. He turned back to face her. "Tell me why," he said. "It's in the letter. The letter is a document. I'm asking you to tell me why." "Career growth. I've been offered a position." "Stop." He walked back toward the desk, not hurrying. "You've had 3 better offers in the last 2 years. I know because I had each one vetted. You turned them all down. Try something else." The heat that moved through her then was not embarrassment, exactly. It was something uglier. The recognition that she had never been as invisible as she thought. That while she had been standing just outside the frame, cataloging him, he had been doing the same to her. "The work has become difficult," she said. "The work has always been difficult." "More difficult." "In what way?" She was quiet. He sat on the edge of the desk and looked at her, and in the lamplight of that sealed office with the storm throwing itself against the glass outside, he looked like something carved rather than born. Jaw hard, eyes darker than usual, that particular quality of his attention that had always felt like being held under examination by something not entirely safe. Vivian. Her name again. He used it differently than other people did, without the pleasantry built in. Just the word. Just her. She looked at him. "What happened?" he said. Quiet now. The flatness was gone. She had promised herself she would hold the line. She had written the letter. She had come on a Thursday. She had planned every variable she could plan, but she had not accounted for the quiet version of his voice, and she had not accounted for the way he was looking at her, not like a problem to be solved or a resource to be retained, but like something was already wrong and he needed to understand how wrong. "I can't do this anymore," she said. The words were different from what she'd planned, plainer, more honest than she'd intended. "Define this." She shook her head. "Vivian." He leaned forward slightly. "Define this." "I can't stand next to you every day." Her voice came out level, which was the one mercy. "I can't sit in those rooms with you and negotiate and strategize and run your life and then go home and pretend I don't." She stopped herself, pressed her lips together, looked at the window instead of him. The rain was still coming. A car somewhere below moved through a flooded street, its lights scattering in the water. "I've done this job well." "You know I have. I'm asking you to accept the letter and let me go." The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. Roman stood. She heard it. The small shift of his weight, his shoes on the hardwood at the edge of the rug. She still wasn't looking at him. "Look at me," he said. She didn't. "Vivian." She turned her head and looked at him, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen before. In 4 years, she had catalogued every configuration of Roman Devereaux. The controlled fury of negotiations going wrong. The cold precision of a decision about a man who had betrayed him. The rare, guarded softness that appeared briefly when something touched him and he didn't manage to suppress it fast enough. She knew all of those. She had no file for this one. "How long?" he said. She understood the question. She hated that she understood it immediately. "It doesn't matter." "How long?" The rain, the locked door, the 42nd floor with the city dissolved in water beneath them. She was so tired of holding things. "Since the 2nd year," she said. "Maybe before that. I stopped tracking it." Roman said nothing. She watched something move through his face, not shock, exactly. Something slower and deeper than shock. Something that looked disconcertingly like recognition. "I'm not," she started. "Don't," he said. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just can't stay." "I told you." "You don't get to tell me no." Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended, and she stood because sitting felt like too much disadvantage. "I am not a piece of your organization. I am not an asset you can refuse to release. I gave you 4 years, Roman. 4 years. You have to let me go." He crossed the space between them. It wasn't fast. It wasn't the kind of movement she'd seen in the brief, violent corrections she'd witnessed him make over the years. The quick, contained force of a man who had learned to be economical about damage. It was slow, deliberate. He stopped when there were 2 feet between them, and she had to actively work to keep herself still, to not step back. Because stepping back would mean something, and she was done letting things mean things in this room. "You're not an asset," he said. Low. Something grinding in it. "You've never been an asset." "Then what am I?" He looked at her for a long time. "Everything," he said. "That's the problem." She didn't know what to do with that. She had prepared for resistance. She had prepared for logic. She had not prepared for this particular word, delivered in that particular register, standing this close. Her prepared response system had no protocol for this configuration. "Roman, you think I don't know what it costs you to be here?" He was not raising his voice. He was never raising his voice. "You think I don't see you, every day, managing every room I walk into, every threat I don't notice until you've already neutralized it, every deal that closes because you worked it from 3 angles before I even sat down. You think I look at that and see an employee. I think you look at that and see a function you need filled. Then you're wrong." Something crossed his face. Not gentle. Nothing about Roman Devereaux was gentle, but something cracked, like a wall taking an impact it wasn't designed for. "You've been wrong about that for a long time." She felt her chest do something painful and complicated. "Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything." "You're doing exactly what you do when you want to keep something you're not supposed to want. You're reframing it. You're making me a strategic problem to solve instead of—" "Vivian." He said her name for what felt like the 5th time, and every time it hit differently, stripped of ornamentation, just the word, just her name from his mouth. And she hated how much it cost her. "I'm not reframing anything. You have been with 4 women in the past 2 years. 4. I scheduled the dinners. I made sure security knew their names. I sat at my desk and She stopped, drew a breath. The honesty was coming out faster than she could manage it now, cracked seams everywhere. "I did that. I did all of that. And I smiled at them when I passed them in your lobby. And I told myself it didn't matter because my feelings were my problem and my problem alone. They didn't matter." "Don't say that." "They didn't, Vivian." His jaw was tight. "Not the way you think they did. Not the way anything—" He stopped, pressed the heel of his hand briefly to his mouth, a gesture she'd seen before but never directed inward, never at his own words. "None of them were you." The rain hit the glass in a sustained wave. The building moved, almost nothing, just its breath. "I don't know what to do with that," she said honestly. "Neither do I." He exhaled slowly. "That's why I need you to stay. Not as a strategy, not because I need what you do, although I do. Because I can't." He He stopped again, and for the first time in 4 years of standing beside Roman Devereaux, she watched him lose access to language. I can't think about you leaving. I've tried. I've spent 6 months trying to think about what this building looks like without you in it, and I can't finish the thought. She stood very still. Outside, the storm pushed hard against the glass. The city lights gone now, just darkness and water, and the two of them in this sealed room on the 42nd floor, with a resignation letter on the desk behind them, and 4 years of unsaid things filling the space between them, like water filling a closed room. Roman, she said, if you say this and you don't mean it, I mean it. If you're saying this to keep me here and tomorrow, He moved the last 2 feet between them, and his hands came up to her face. Not grabbing, nothing like that. Just his palms against her jaw, cupping her face like something that could break. And she felt all of it at once, the warmth of his hands and the controlled strength held in absolute check, and the expression on his face that she had no file for, the one she'd never seen before, that looked like a man who had finally run out of ways to hold something back. I mean it, he said again, right there, close enough that she could hear his breathing. Then he kissed her, not gently. Roman Devereaux did not do anything gently, and this was no different. It was thorough and certain and real. Real the way almost nothing else in 4 years had felt real. Real the way she had spent those 4 years being terrified it would never be. And she kissed him back because she had no preparation for this, no defense against this, because she'd spent 4 years building every defense she had, and he'd just walked through all of them in 40 seconds. When they broke apart, she was breathing like she'd run somewhere. He kept his hands on her face. Stay, he said. One word. All of it in one word. She looked at him. The storm. The locked room. The letter on the desk. You understand what this changes, she said. Everything. People in your organization, I know. You have enemies who will, I know. He said it without flinching. I know exactly what it changes. Stay anyway. She had 11 days of preparation and 4 printed resignation letters and a very specific plan for a Thursday night. None of it had accounted for this. She looked at him for a long time. The rain ran down the glass in crooked lines, the city invisible below them, the world reduced to this room and this man, and the 4 years she'd spent standing just outside his periphery while her heart did what hearts do without asking permission. All right, she said. It was not the speech she'd planned. It was not the careful, managed exit she'd constructed. It was 2 syllables, and it undid 4 years of architecture in under a second. Something changed in his face. Not relief, exactly. Something deeper and quieter than relief. He lowered his hands. She felt the absence of them. He reached past her, lifted the resignation letter from the desk, and without looking at it, he folded it once and held it over the small trash bin beside the desk and let it drop. All right, he said, mirroring her. She should have felt settled. She should have felt like something was resolved. Instead, she felt the opposite, like something had just been pulled loose from a structure that had been held in tension for years, and now all the weight was redistributing, and she couldn't yet tell what would bear it and what would not. She didn't know, standing in that office with his bourbon untouched and the storm battering the glass, that before the week was out, she would be standing in front of every senior figure in Roman's organization while a man with a gun sat 12 feet to her left. She didn't know that the choice they'd made in that room tonight would have a cost, and that the cost would be calculated in the particular currency of men who believed love was a liability, and that liabilities needed to be removed. She didn't know any of that yet. She only knew the rain, and the unlocked door, and the resignation letter at the bottom of a trash bin, and the way Roman Devereaux was looking at her like he was seeing something he'd been looking for since before he understood he was looking. Outside, somewhere below in the flooded streets of Chicago, a black SUV idled at the corner across from the building. The man behind the wheel had been sitting there for 40 minutes. He lifted a phone and made a call, and when the other end picked up, he said 3 words. She's still there. The line went dead. The storm continued. The building breathed, and 42 floors above the street, the most feared man in the Midwest sat behind his desk again, and Vivian Hartwell sat across from him, and they both understood, without saying it, that the thing they had just chosen was not safety. It was not ease. It was not a clean beginning. It was the match and the fuel in the same room. And somewhere down there in the rain, someone had already started counting the cost. The black SUV was still there in the morning. Vivian saw it from the window of the building's side exit, a different angle than the front lobby, a view most people never used. She used it because she had spent 4 years learning which exits existed in every building she worked in. Old habit, the kind that didn't require a reason anymore. The SUV sat across from the parking structure entrance, engine off, windows dark. Could have been nothing. A car waiting for someone in the apartments above. A driver killing time. Chicago had 10,000 explanations for a parked car on a wet street. She memorized the plate anyway and kept walking. The morning was cold and washed out, the storm having moved east overnight and left the city looking scrubbed raw. Gutters still ran. Puddles sat in every low point of the sidewalk. The air smelled like lake water and concrete, and the particular emptiness of a Thursday night that had become a Friday no one planned for. She had not gone home. After the office, after the conversation, after the kiss and the resignation letter in the trash, Roman had called for a car to take her to one of the organization's secure residences, a brownstone on the north side that looked residential from the street and had a security system that cost more than most people's houses. She'd been there before on work emergencies. She knew the codes. The driver hadn't asked questions. Drivers for Roman Devereaux never asked questions. She'd lain on a bed that wasn't hers, in a room that smelled like cleaning solution, and stared at the ceiling for 4 hours and not slept. At 6 a.m., she showered and dressed in the same clothes, the gray blazer, the dark slacks, and called herself a car back to the building. She had told herself it was about work. There were reports due. There was a scheduled call with the organization's financial liaison in New York at 8. There was always a reason. The real reason was that she needed to see Roman in daylight and determine if last night was real or if the storm in the locked office and the particular exhaustion of 4 years had produced something she was now going to have to dismantle before it caused damage. She rode the elevator to 42. The floor was already moving. Assistants, 2 of Roman's operational staff, Marcus Chen at his standing desk in the outer office, with a coffee going cold at his elbow. Marcus was 34 and ran logistics for the East Side operations. And he had always been careful and correct around Vivian in a way that suggested he understood her position without being told to. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her in a way that was slightly different from yesterday. She couldn't pinpoint the difference exactly. The angle was the same, the expression was controlled, but something in the assessment had shifted, like a camera recalibrating its focus. She went to her office without stopping. Roman was already in his. She could see the light under the door. She could hear, very faintly, his voice. Another call. Or the same one. She sat down at her own desk, opened her laptop, found 7 emails that needed responses and 2 that needed to be ignored, and spent 20 minutes doing something that resembled work, while her mind ran the previous night from multiple angles, looking for the flaw in it. There was a knock at her door at 7:42. "Come in." Gideon Cross opened the door. She had known him for the same 4 years she'd known Roman, and she had never once found him easy. Gideon was 47, built lean and angular, with the particular economy of movement that belonged to men who had done violent things and learned not to waste energy on anything that wasn't necessary. He was Roman's second in command and had been for 11 years, long before Vivian arrived, long before the empire achieved its current shape. He'd been present at every critical decision. He'd been the instrument of some of them. He had never been warm to her. He hadn't been cold either. He'd been something more precise than either. Neutral in the way a blade is neutral. Not hostile, not friendly, simply what it was. He stepped inside her office and closed the door. "Gideon," she said, "you were here last night." Not a question. "I work here until 9 p.m. on a Thursday, and then you were at the Halstead house until this morning." He stood in front of her desk with his hands at his sides and his eyes doing the assessment thing they always did, gathering information without permission. "That's a change in pattern. Is there something you need from me? I need to know what's happening." "That's a wide question." "Vivian," his voice went flat. "Don't." She held his gaze. "There's nothing to report. Roman and I had a conversation that ran late. The weather was bad. He arranged a car and a place to stay. It was practical." Gideon was quiet for a moment. He was very good at quiet. He deployed it the way some men deployed noise, his pressure. "Roman came in this morning at 6:15, he said. "I've worked with him for 11 years. He doesn't come in before 7:30 unless there's a crisis. There's no crisis on the board this morning. She said nothing. He also told Marcus to clear his afternoon schedule. Gideon tilted his head slightly. Roman doesn't clear his afternoon schedule, not for anything that isn't operational. You'd have to ask him why. I'm asking you. I'm not Roman's spokesperson. No, Gideon said. You're something. I'm trying to determine what. The word landed without ornament, and she understood it was not an insult. It was a genuine operational concern, stated by a man who had kept Roman Devereaux's empire functioning for over a decade by refusing to allow sentiment to compromise intelligence. She almost respected it. I understand your concern, she said, but this isn't something I'm going to walk you through right now. He looked at her for another 3 seconds. Then, this organization has survived because the people inside it don't let personal entanglements complicate command structure. I'm aware. Are you? Gideon. She kept her voice level. I know this building. I know what's at stake in it. I know what every entanglement costs. I've been managing those costs for 4 years. Managing them from a position of professional distance. Yes. And now? She looked at him across her desk. The morning light was pale and flat through the window behind her, making everything look like a photograph taken slightly wrong. Now, she said, is Roman's conversation to have. Gideon held her gaze for another beat, then nodded once, a short, precise nod that conceded nothing but acknowledged that the conversation had reached its boundary. He opened her door and left without another word. She exhaled slowly through her nose. The 8 o'clock call with New York went without incident. The financial liaison, a careful man named Porter who communicated exclusively in understatement, walked through the quarterly positions with his usual measured pace, and she took notes and asked the right questions and gave no indication that her entire structural relationship with this organization had shifted 12 hours ago in a sealed office 42 floors above the street. After the call, Roman appeared in her doorway. He did not knock. He never knocked at her door. It was one of the protocols she had simply absorbed without addressing, the same way she'd absorbed 100 other things about how Roman moved through a space and expected others to calibrate around him. He looked at her. She looked at him. In daylight, in the context of the office, with the sounds of the building operating around them. Yes. Real. The evidence was in the way he was standing in her doorway, which was different from every other time he had stood in her doorway. The difference in it something she couldn't precisely articulate, but could absolutely register. How was Porter? He said, cautious, as usual. The positions in New York are clean. Good. He stepped inside and pulled the door partially closed behind him. Gideon came to see you. Yes. What did he say? He wanted to understand the change in pattern. I told him nothing specific. I said it was your conversation to have. Roman's jaw moved. I'll talk to him today. You should do it soon. He's already running calculations. I know. He stood for a moment. Not at her desk, not near the window, but in the middle of her office, occupying the space with the slightly unfamiliar quality of a man who had entered a room he thought he knew and found it rearranged. Last night was real, she said. If that's what you're checking. He looked at her sharply. I spent 4 hours checking it myself, she said. I'm satisfied it was real. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile. Roman's face didn't do easy smiles. But something in that direction. Somewhere in the register of a thing that hurt a little and also didn't. Gideon's not going to make this simple, she said. No. And he's not wrong. From a structural standpoint, an operational relationship that becomes personal creates... Vivian. She stopped. I know what it creates, he said quietly. I've known what it would create since before last night. I've been knowing it for a long time. He looked at her. I need you to trust that I've thought through the implications. Have you thought through the part where I become a target? The room went quiet in a specific way. Explain, he said. Someone had a car parked outside the building last night. North side of the parking structure, dark plate, sat there for at least 40 minutes that I know of. It was gone this morning, but the position suggests surveillance, not coincidence. She turned her monitor and showed him the photograph she'd taken on her phone from the side exit. I ran the partial plate this morning. It's a shell registration, one of 3 tied to a holding company that doesn't appear in any of our operational files. Roman looked at the photograph. His face had gone to the closed version. When did you take this? 6:45 this morning. You didn't call me. I wanted to run the partial first. Calling you with an unverified plate and a bad feeling seemed, call me next time. His voice was not raised. It did not need to be. Before verification, always. Understood. He took her phone and sent the photograph to himself. His eyes were doing the things she recognized. Mapping threat vectors, calculating probabilities, running the information against a mental architecture of enemies and risks, and the particular economics of leverage in an organization like his. I have a meeting tonight, he said. The Liang family. She knew the name. Eastern import routes, historically independent, recently pressured by the expansion of the Voss syndicate into their territories. 3 weeks ago, Roman had initiated exploratory contact. She had helped him draft the preliminary terms. That's tomorrow night, she said. I moved it. His eyes didn't leave her monitor. This afternoon at 2, something changed in their situation overnight. Marcus got a communication at 5 a.m. The Liang family is under pressure from Voss, and they need to move faster than we anticipated. That's a significant compression of the timeline. Yes. And it's also... She stopped herself. Also what? It's also the kind of pressure that can be manufactured. A forced timeline on a new alliance, under surveillance from an unidentified party, the morning after a significant change in your personal situation. She looked at him. Someone might know more about last night than we'd like. The silence that followed was the operational kind, the kind Roman used when he was recalibrating. The car, he said. Yes. He was quiet for another moment, then, come to the meeting. Roman, you have the full file. You've run these terms better than anyone on my staff. Come to the meeting. Coming to that meeting in a capacity other than coordinator changes my position in a way that will be visible to everyone present. I know. He finally looked away from the monitor and back at her. That's why I'm asking. She understood what he was doing. He was not hiding her. He was not managing the situation quietly, keeping her in a back room while he handled the operational front. He was asking her to step into the room, fully, visibly. The implications of that were significant in approximately 6 different directions, and she was already running all of them. All right, she said, the same 2 words as last night, same weight, different room. He nodded, left her office. She heard him cross to his own and the sound of his door. She turned back to her screen. By noon, the building had changed in a way she couldn't point to but could feel. The same people occupied the same desks and moved through the same corridors, but something had shifted in the texture of it. A degree of attention, a slightly altered quality to the looks she received crossing the floor. Nothing hostile. Not yet. More like weather changing a degree at a time, the kind of shift you feel in your joints before it shows in the sky. Marcus caught her at the coffee station at 12:30. He was careful, as always. He poured his coffee and looked at the window and said, at low volume, Gideon's been on his phone since 10. Calling who? Don't know. Private line. She absorbed that. Thank you, Marcus. He nodded and took his coffee and left. At 1:15, she was in the conference room running the Liang file when Gideon came in. He didn't sit. He stood at the end of the table with his hands on the back of a chair and looked at her across the spread of documents. You're going to the Liang meeting, he said. Roman asked me to attend. As what? I haven't been given a specific designation. That's the problem. His voice was controlled, but the control was doing more work than usual. You walk into a meeting with the Liang family, and you're not Marcus, you're not a coordinator, you're not a liaison, you're something new, and something new in the room changes how they read Roman. I think it clarifies how they should read Roman. Gideon's jaw tightened. This isn't a game. I know it isn't. You've never been in a room like this one. You've run files and you've managed operations from behind a desk, and you are exceptionally good at both of those things. Gideon. But walking into a meeting with a criminal family as Romans, he stopped, as whatever you are to him now. That puts a mark on you. It puts a mark on this organization. It gives every enemy we have a pressure point that didn't exist yesterday. She looked at him steadily. I know. Then why? Because he asked me to. She said it simply. And because it's the right call strategically, not just personally. The Liang family is moving under duress. They need to see stability on our side. They need to see that Roman's position is solid and his inner structure is not in flux. Bringing me into that room as someone with full operational knowledge who stands beside him without hesitation is exactly the kind of signal that steadies a nervous family on the edge of a major decision. Gideon stared at her. She waited. "You ran that analysis this morning," he said. "Yes." "And he didn't." She said nothing. Which was, she knew, an answer. Something moved across Gideon's face that she had no prior data for. It was not the hostility she'd expected. It was something more complicated, a grudging reappraisal happening in real time, wrestling with something he didn't want to concede. "The car outside last night," he said. She kept her expression neutral. "You know about that." "Roman told me 20 minutes ago." His hands tightened on the chair back. "Vivian, if Voss has eyes on this building, if Voss has already connected you to Roman at a non-operational level, then you walking into that Liang meeting doesn't just mark you. It confirms you. It turns you from a staff member into a target with strategic value." "Yes," she said. "Yes." He repeated it, flat. "That's your response." "It's accurate." "It's insane. It might be both." She gathered the files in front of her. "Are you going to the meeting?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. "Good." She stood, collected the files, and moved past him toward the door. She felt his eyes on her back. Not with malice, but with the particular weight of a man who was running probabilities about someone he'd underestimated and finding the margin slimmer than expected. The Liang meeting was held in a secured facility 20 minutes south of the building, a converted commercial space that Roman's organization used for third-party negotiations. Neutral ground, technically. The kind of neutral ground with cameras in every corner and 2 of Roman's men in the building's service corridor. There were 4 members of the Liang family present. Vincent Liang, the patriarch, 71, who had built his operation from import logistics into something considerably less legal over 30 years. His son Daniel, 38, who handled day-to-day operations with the compressed energy of a man managing too many variables at once. And 2 men whose names Vivian did not have, but whose presence on either side of the Liangs communicated their function clearly enough. Roman brought Vivian, Gideon, and Marcus. She sat to Roman's right. She watched Vincent Liang register that, watched his eyes move from Roman to her and back, the tiny recalibration happening in his expression. He was too experienced to show reaction, but the assessment was there. Daniel Liang was less controlled. He looked at her with an openness that was almost questions, then looked at Gideon, then back at Roman. "Mr. Devereaux," Vincent said, "thank you for accommodating the change in schedule." "Of course." Roman's voice was steady and even, and he did not explain Vivian, and he did not introduce her with a title. He introduced her by name only. "This is Vivian Hartwell." Vincent Liang nodded once. Vivian nodded back. The meeting opened on terms. Daniel Liang spoke most of the operational points, route adjustments, security protocols, the specific pressures Voss was applying to their eastern entry points. She listened and cross-referenced against the files she had memorized and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. Then Daniel said something about the western corridor structure that didn't align. It didn't align with the file, and it didn't align with intelligence she'd assembled from 3 separate sources over the last month, and the discrepancy was small enough that it could be an error or a simplification, or it could be something else entirely. She said quietly, "That's not the current arrangement." Daniel stopped. The room looked at her. She kept her voice level and her eyes on the documents in front of her, not on Daniel. The western corridor currently routes through 2 intermediate points, not 1. The second intermediate was added 6 weeks ago after the Voss pressure started. Removing it from the description changes the security calculation significantly. Silence. Vincent Liang looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Roman. Roman said nothing. He was watching her. "You've done your research," Vincent said. His voice was careful. "I try to," she said. Daniel's jaw was tight. He looked at his father. Something passed between them in the silence. She couldn't read it, but she didn't need to. She'd identified the discrepancy. Whether it was error or test or something operational, it was now visible. The meeting continued. She spoke 4 more times, each time precisely. Each time with enough specificity to demonstrate that the file she carried was not the summary file. When the Liangs left 40 minutes later, Vincent paused at the door and looked back at her. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Mr. Liang." He studied her for a moment with the particular quality of a man who had lived long enough in a specific world to recognize capability when it appeared in an unexpected form. Then he nodded, a fractionally deeper nod than the one he'd given her at the opening, and he left. The door closed. Gideon exhaled. "The second intermediate point," he said. "I didn't have that. I added it to the file 2 weeks ago. It wasn't distributed to the full team yet." He looked at her, then at Roman. Roman was still watching her, and his expression was the one she had no file for, the one she'd first seen last night in his office, but with something added to it now. Something that looked like the particular satisfaction of a man who had known something was true and has just watched the room confirm it. "That was a test," Marcus said. He was looking at the closed door. "Daniel gave you the single-point description deliberately." "Almost certainly," Vivian said. "Why?" "Because the Liangs are under pressure, and they need to know that the people they're trusting with their vulnerability are worth trusting. A new face in the room needs to prove its value quickly or become a liability." She set her pen down on the table. "They were checking whether I was decoration." "And now they know you're not," Marcus said. "Yes." Roman stood. The meeting was over by his body language, and the others felt it and began gathering documents. Gideon was last to move, and as he picked up his folder, he looked at Vivian with that same expression she'd tried to categorize earlier, the grudging reassessment, and said quietly so that only she heard it, "You're going to make everything more complicated." "I know," she said. "And you're going to make it stronger." She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the door the Liangs had gone through, and his voice had the careful, begrudging quality of a man giving ground 1 inch at a time because the ground was simply no longer his to hold. She said nothing. In the car back to the building, Roman sat beside her, close enough that she was aware of the heat off him, the slight tension in his posture that meant he was still processing, still running what had happened in multiple directions. He said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then his phone rang. He answered. She heard the voice on the other end, not the words, just the register. Controlled. Measured. The voice of a man delivering information rather than a report. She watched Roman's face. She watched it change. Not much. A degree of tightening around the jaw. A stillness behind the eyes that meant the information was significant. He said 4 words. When did this happen? Then he listened. Then he said, I'll handle it. He ended the call. Held the phone in his hand for a moment. The car moved through evening traffic. Headlights beginning to appear as the day dropped out. The city picking up its nighttime frequency. Roman, she said. He turned and looked at her. One of my people inside the Voss operation is dead. She went still. He was found this afternoon. Someone moved on him within the last 24 hours. His voice was flat. He was the only person outside this organization who knew about the Liang meeting. The implication of that sat in the space between them like a third person in the car. Outside the window, the city continued its motion, indifferent, thousands of people moving through their lives at the exact moment that Vivian Hartwell understood, fully, without margin, that the choice she had made last night in a locked office had not stayed inside that room. It had moved out into the city the same way the storm had moved east, invisible and already gone, and already leaving damage behind it. And somewhere inside the organization, inside the specific and trusted circle of people who had known about the Liang meeting before this afternoon, someone had already decided that the cost of what Roman Devereaux had chosen needed to be collected. The car moved through the dark city. Neither of them spoke. And the building they were returning to, lit and vertical against the night sky, looked exactly the same as it always had. That was the thing about certain kinds of danger. It didn't announce itself on the outside. It lived in the structure. It had been living there maybe for the sentence had no ending. That was how she would remember it later. Not the words Roman said in the car. Not the specific weight of what they meant, but the incompleteness of it. The thing that had been living in the structure maybe for... and then nothing. The car pulling into the underground parking structure. the fluorescent light replacing darkness, the world going flat and practical the way it always did when something terrible had already happened, and the body was still catching up to the information. Roman was out of the car before it fully stopped. She followed. He moved through the parking level with the particular compressed velocity of a man who had already decided what needed to happen next and was running the sequence in his head simultaneously with moving his body through space. She matched his pace. Heels on concrete, the sound of it sharp and regular, the parking structure cold and chemical smelling around them. The elevator, the long vertical pull upward. She looked at the number display and thought, someone inside the circle. Someone who knew the Liang meeting existed before this afternoon. She counted them as the floors passed. Roman, Gideon, Marcus. 2 operational staff who had handled the scheduling change that morning, possibly a third if someone had been copied on the communications. 6 people, maybe 7. One of them had moved on a man within 24 hours of the meeting being confirmed. The elevator opened on 42. Roman went directly to the conference room, and she went directly behind him. Gideon was already there. She didn't know if he'd been called or if he'd been waiting, but he was standing at the head of the table with his jacket off and his phone face down, and his expression carrying the specific flatness of a man who had already received the same information. "You know," Roman said, "Marcus called me from the car." Gideon looked at Vivian briefly, then back at Roman. "I've been running the contact list for the Liang meeting since I got the news." "And? 6 confirmed? Possibly 7? There was a scheduling copy sent through an internal channel at 9 a.m. that I'm still tracing." He pulled out a chair and sat, which for Gideon was a signal of gravity. He did not sit in tense situations unless he was settling in for something sustained. "The window on the informant is tight. He was alive at midnight, found at 3 this afternoon. Someone moved fast." "Too fast for improvisation," Vivian said. Both men looked at her. That kind of response, moving on an asset within 12 to 15 hours of a meeting being confirmed, that's not reactive. You don't have the logistics in place for that unless you've been watching that specific person for a while and you were waiting for the right moment. The Liang meeting gave someone the justification, not the capability. Roman pulled out the chair across from Gideon and sat down. He looked at the table for a moment, then, "Which means the assets cover was already compromised. Someone inside knew about him before yesterday." "Yes," Vivian said. "That narrows it." His voice was very quiet. "That narrows it considerably." Gideon was looking at his phone now, scrolling through something with the controlled speed of a man performing a task he'd been performing for years. The scheduling copy at 9 a.m. went to one additional address, internal, secure channel, but he stopped. The room was very still. "Gideon," Roman said. Gideon set the phone down on the table and pushed it across without looking up. Roman looked at the screen. Vivian watched his face. She watched the stillness come over it. The specific stillness she had cataloged over 4 years. The one that arrived when something had been confirmed rather than suspected. When the mind finished running the calculation and accepted the result. It was the most frightening version of his face. Not the anger, which was visible. This was the version where the anger went somewhere beneath expression and became structural. He pushed the phone back. "Get him up here," Roman said. "Roman, get him up here, Gideon." Gideon stood, took the phone, and left the room. Vivian sat down across from Roman. He was looking at the surface of the table. His hands were flat on it, palms down, fingers spread slightly. She'd seen him in 100 high-pressure situations, and she had never seen his hands do that, the spreading of fingers, like a man pressing down against something that wanted to rise. "Who?" she said. He looked at her. "Tell me who." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Reeves." She went through her mental architecture of the organization and found the name instantly, Thomas Reeves. 44. Operational Communications Director. The man who managed the secure internal channels, the scheduling systems, the encrypted routing that kept the organization's internal information from bleeding outward. He had been in that position for 3 years. Before that, he'd been on the operational side, East Chicago. Roman had promoted him personally. She kept her face from doing anything. "You're certain," she said. "The scheduling copy went through his channel authority, not through his personal address. He's too careful for that, but through a routing key that only exists on his terminal. That could be, it's not a coincidence." Roman's voice was flat, but underneath it she could hear the specific quality that she had learned over years to identify as the thing that came before grief in men who didn't grieve easily. Not sadness. Something harder and colder and more final. I gave him that position because I trusted him. I have trusted him for 3 years with the most sensitive routing in this building. She said nothing. He was at the meeting announcement this morning, Roman said. He was in the outer office when Marcus confirmed the time change. He had access to the asset's contact file through the communication system. Did he know the asset's identity? He shouldn't have. The asset was compartmented. Roman's jaw tightened. But the Liang meeting file went through his channel. And the Liang file had a reference code that could be cross-indexed against the asset management system if you knew what you were looking for. He looked at her. And if you'd been building toward this for long enough, you'd know what you were looking for. She held his gaze. How long do you think it's been? I don't know. And those 3 words, carried more weight than anything else he'd said in the last 20 minutes. Because Roman Devereaux not knowing something in his own organization was not a small thing. It was the kind of structural failure that didn't announce itself. It moved through the walls slowly, undetectable, until the wall was already compromised and the pressure was already inside. The door opened. Thomas Reeves walked in with Gideon 2 paces behind him. He was medium height, light-complected, with the groomed neatness of a man who managed information systems, organized, contained, comfortable in administrative precision. He had always been pleasant to Vivian in the corridors, the kind of pleasant that was policy rather than warmth. She had cataloged it and filed it as professional and moved on. He looked at Roman and she watched him determine from the room's texture that something was structurally wrong, and she watched him decide in approximately 3 seconds how to manage his face around that determination. He was good at it. He landed on carefully neutral. Roman, he said, you needed me. Sit down, Thomas. Reeves pulled out a chair and sat. He put his hands on the table, loose, open, a practiced posture of transparency that she recognized as the body language of someone who'd been trained, formally or otherwise, in deception management. What's this about? He said. I think you know, Roman said. I don't. Flat. Immediate. The 9 a.m. scheduling copy, the Liang meeting file, the routing key on your terminal, a beat. Shorter than it should have been, which meant he'd already prepared for this version of the conversation. There was a scheduling anomaly this morning. The time change came through on a compressed sequence and the system auto-distributed to the secondary tier. I flagged it for review and... Stop. Roman's voice didn't change volume. It changed quality. Stop talking around it. Reeves stopped. The room held its breath. Marcus Chen is dead, Roman said. She felt the correction land in her before she processed it. Not the informant, not the asset. Marcus. She looked up sharply. Reeves blinked. 20 minutes ago, in the parking structure of his apartment building. Roman's eyes did not leave Reeves. Someone was waiting for him. The color left Reeves's face, not controlled, not performed. The blood actually drained from it in a way that could not be managed, the body's honest response to information the mind hadn't prepared for. Which meant, she cataloged it instantly, which meant Reeves had not known about Marcus. He had sent the information and he had been paid or pressured or leveraged into sending it, but he had not known what would be done with it and how far it would go and who it would reach beyond the meeting logistics. The distinction mattered. It didn't save him, but it mattered. Thomas, she said. He looked at her. His face was completely undone now. The managed neutrality gone, replaced with something raw and poorly assembled. Who did you send the file to? She said. Vivian, Gideon started. Who did you send it to? She said again, same tone, holding Reeves's eyes. He looked at Roman. Roman said nothing. I didn't, Reeves started. You did, she said. And Marcus Chen is dead because of what you sent. And the longer you run the denial, the more that's on you and the less space you have to work with. So tell me who. His hands on the table were no longer loose. They had closed into a configuration that wasn't quite fists, a half fold white at the knuckles, the hands of a man holding something in that needed to come out. I didn't know they'd kill anyone, he said. The room went very quiet. Voss? He said. It was Voss. They came to me 8 months ago. He looked at the table. I have a daughter. She's 12. They found her school. They made it very clear what the alternative was. His voice cracked on the last word, and he pressed his mouth together and held it. I sent operational updates, scheduling, routing changes. Nothing I thought would... He stopped. I didn't know about the asset. I didn't know what they'd do with the Liang file. Roman stood. The movement was slow, and she felt Gideon shift behind Reeves in response to it, the room recalibrating around Roman standing the way rooms always did. 8 months, Roman said. Reeves nodded, eyes on the table. 8 months. Roman repeated it not as a question but as a measurement, something being weighed. Every routing change, every scheduling anomaly, for 8 months. I'm sorry. And he was. It was visible in every line of him, the genuine collapse of a man who had done something he couldn't undo for a reason he couldn't unhave, and the weight of it had finally found a surface. It didn't change what it meant. She was doing the math as Roman stood there, 8 months of operational data feeding into Voss's intelligence structure. 8 months of scheduling patterns, routing keys, communication timing. Voss wouldn't just have known about the Liang meeting. Voss would have a near-complete picture of how Roman's organization moved, communicated, and structured its decisions, which meant this was not a reaction to last night. This had been building for 8 months. The car outside the building, the informant's death, the Liang meeting compression, all of it moving already before Roman had walked Vivian to the front of the room, before the resignation letter, before the locked office, before any of it. She had thought she was a complication introduced into a stable situation. She was not. She had walked into the last act of something that had been in motion since the summer. Gideon, Roman said. I'll handle it, Gideon said. Reeves looked up and she saw the fear in him. Immediate, total. The fear of a man who understood the range of what I'll handle it meant in this room, with these men, in this organization. His daughter, Vivian said. Roman looked at her. He said Voss threatened his daughter. She held Roman's gaze. If we move on Reeves and Voss already has eyes on the building, and they do, we know they do, then the first thing they do is close out their leverage point. That means the girl. The silence stretched. She needs to be moved tonight, Vivian said, before anything else happens in this room. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that she couldn't categorize. Then he looked at Gideon, and Gideon gave a short nod and pulled out his phone and moved to the corner of the room. Reeves was staring at her. His eyes were wet, which he was clearly trying to manage and failing. She did not offer him anything. She had said what needed to be said for operational reasons, and for the reason that a 12-year-old girl had no stake in any of this, and was the only person in the whole chain of the last 8 months who was genuinely innocent of everything. That was all. Roman sat back down. He looked at the table again. How much does Voss know about Vivian? He said to Reeves. Reeves wiped his face with the back of his hand. Steadied. I don't think much. The files I sent were operational, scheduling, routing. Your name came up in the context of... He stopped. 3 weeks ago, they asked me specifically about the executive staff. Who had access to what? I gave them titles and access levels. Did you give them her name? Yes. Roman did not visibly react. She felt something go very still inside her own chest. Did you give them her access level? Yes. So they know she has full operational access. Roman's voice was completely level. They know she has been managing the organization's strategic operations for 4 years, and they know from last night that she is no longer a staff member. Reeves said nothing. The car outside the building was there before last night, she said. They already knew about me operationally. Last night just added a different category. Yes, Roman said, which means the target they've been building toward isn't last night's decision. The target... She stopped herself because the conclusion she was reaching was one she needed a moment to absorb. The target has been me for some time, not because of who I am personally, because of what I know. 4 years of operational access, full file authority, communication routing, financial structures. She looked at Roman. I'm the most complete picture of your organization that exists outside of you. The room held the weight of that. If Voss takes her, Gideon said from the corner, phone lowered. They don't need to fight you. They just need an hour with her. And they have everything they need to dismantle the organization from the outside. Roman looked at Vivian. She looked back at him. Last night she had been a woman trying to resign from a job. She had walked in with a letter and a plan and a Thursday night, and 4 years of carefully maintained distance between herself and the full weight of what this organization actually was. She was not that woman anymore. She had not been that woman since the lock clicked and the letter went in the trash, and she sat across from him in the Liang meeting and called Daniel Liang's bluff about the Western Corridor. She had stepped all the way in, and the door behind her was no longer there. They'll move tonight, she said. It wasn't a question. The informant is already dead. They know the leak has been identified. Yes, Reeves goes dark. They'll know. They have maybe 4 hours before this organization is fully locked down and the window closes. Yes, Roman said. So we can't go back to the building? No. And we can't go to any of the secondary locations that Reeves had access to? No, she breathed, slow. The cold conference room air in and out, steady, her heart doing something fast that she was not going to show in her face or her body or her hands. Then we need a location that doesn't exist in any file Thomas Reeves ever touched, she said, and we need it in the next 20 minutes. Roman reached into his jacket and produced a key. Old, physical, the kind of key that belonged to a door with a deadbolt and no digital trace. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it. There's a place, he said. I've told no one about it. It's not in any system. It doesn't have a name in any file. He paused. I built it for exactly this kind of failure. I hoped I'd never need it. She looked at the key and then at him. How many people know it exists, she said. 1. He held her gaze. Now 2. She picked up the key. It was cold in her palm, the teeth of it sharp against her fingers, the weight of it almost nothing, just metal, just an object, except that it was the only thing standing between her and whatever Voss was moving through the dark city outside this building with her name already in their operational files, and 4 years of her work cataloged as the key was cold in her palm for exactly 4 minutes. That was how long it took Roman to move them out of the conference room, down the service stairwell, at the back of the building, not the elevator, never the elevator when the threat was internal, through the loading corridor on the 2nd floor, and into a vehicle that Gideon had sourced from the building's underground maintenance pool. Not one of the organization's registered fleet, a plain gray Chevy that belonged to the building's facilities contractor and had never appeared in any operational file. Gideon drove. Roman was in the passenger seat. Vivian sat behind Roman and watched the city move past the rain-streaked window and ran numbers in her head. Not financial numbers, not the kind she managed from behind a desk, but a different calculation entirely. Personnel, access, response time. The geometry of a threat moving through a city toward a position it already knew. They had a window. She kept telling herself that. 4 hours, maybe 5. Voss would need time to confirm that Reeves had gone dark, time to recalibrate, time to move assets into position. Organizations like Voss, she knew the operational profile from 4 years of watching Roman manage the border of it, moved efficiently, but not instantly. They had infrastructure and procedure the same way Roman did. Procedure took time, unless they'd already started moving before Reeves went dark. Unless the car outside the building last night had not been observation but staging. She kept that thought behind her teeth and looked at the back of Roman's head and said nothing. The safe location was 40 minutes south of the loop, a warehouse conversion in a light industrial corridor that had been, at various points, a printing facility, a textile storage unit, and currently a registered holding property of a real estate management company whose paperwork was impeccably maintained and pointed to nothing. She had never seen it in any file. She believed him when he said it existed outside the system. Gideon pulled into the side access and cut the lights. They went in through a steel door that responded to the key. Inside, a space that had been built for exactly this purpose. Not comfortable, not permanent, but functional in the specific way of a room designed for survival rather than habitation. 2 rooms off a central corridor, a communication setup that ran off an independent encrypted channel. Bottled water. A weapons case that was locked, and she did not ask what was in it because she already knew. Roman moved immediately to the communication setup. Gideon stood in the corridor with his phone, his face carrying the tight, compressed expression of a man managing too many moving pieces simultaneously. He looked at her once and she read the look correctly. Not hostility, not the earlier resistance, but something that had been scoured down to its functional core. They were past the question of whether she should be here. They were inside the consequence of it. "I need the full Voss operational map," Roman said from the communications room. "I have it," she said. She moved to the secondary terminal. Her access credentials, she verified them on the encrypted channel, still active, still routing through the organization's secure server. Reeves hadn't had time to do anything about her access before Gideon had moved him. She was grateful for exactly that margin. She pulled the Voss file. It was not the summary file. It was the complete assembled intelligence. 3 years of observation data, cross-reference reports, financial mapping, personnel identification. She had built a significant portion of it herself, absorbed it across hundreds of operational briefings, and she knew it the way she knew the organization's own structure, from memory and from bone. "Current personnel assets with Chicago Operational Authority," she said, reading fast. "Voss maintains 4 primary deployment teams in the metro area. 2 are documented at fixed locations, here and here." She turned the screen so Roman could see. "The other 2 are mobile. Based on the last update 3 weeks ago, Mobile Team Alpha stages from the Pilsen corridor. Mobile Team Beta, unknown current position." "Beta is the threat," Roman said. "Yes. Beta is the one you use when you're moving on a target rather than holding a position." "How many?" "The last documented count was 7. That number is 18 months old." "Could be higher." "Yes." Roman looked at the map. His face was the closed version, operational, stripped of everything that wasn't immediately functional. She had seen this face before in crises, and it had always carried a particular quality of terrible competence. The man who had built an empire from nothing and held it for 15 years did not become that by being slow in a room like this one. "They know this address," Gideon said from the doorway. He had his phone in his hand and his voice was flat and careful. "I just got confirmation from a contact in the Pilsen corridor. A vehicle matching Voss's mobile pattern was seen 40 minutes ago moving south on the industrial corridor." The room recalibrated. She felt it in her chest. Not panic, she had no time for panic, but the specific physical response of a body, understanding that the calculation had just changed, and the window she'd been counting on was considerably smaller than 4 hours. "How did they know?" Roman said. Not to Gideon, to the room, to the question itself. She answered it because she had been running it for the last 40 minutes in the car. "The key," she said. "Not the key itself, but the property record. You said the real estate management company's paperwork is clean, but clean paperwork on a property in this corridor, held by a company with no operational history, in a location you've maintained for years, someone with enough time and the right kind of financial forensics could find it. Voss has had 8 months of your routing data." She looked at him. 8 months is enough time to look at your financial structure and find the anomalies. Roman's jaw tightened. "They didn't follow us here," she said. "They already knew it existed. They were waiting to see if we'd run to it." The silence lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Roman said, "Gideon, the case." Gideon moved. She heard the weapons case open. The mechanical release of it. The controlled sounds of a man who handled that kind of equipment with the efficiency of long practice. She did not look. She was still at the terminal, running the Voss personnel map against the property layout, calculating approach vectors. "There are 3 access points," she said. "The steel door we came through, a secondary loading door on the east wall, and a roof access point that connects to the adjacent building." She turned. "The steel door is the obvious approach. They'll cover it. The loading door. The east wall has no sightline from the street, which means they can stage there quietly. The roof access is the variable. It depends on whether they have assets in the adjacent building already." "Assume they do," Roman said. He was checking a weapon with the same economical precision as everything else he did. Magazine mechanism, placement. He held a second one out toward her. She looked at it. "Vivian, I know how to use it," she said. She took it. The weight of it was familiar from the range sessions that had been a condition of her employment 4 years ago. Roman had required it of everyone at her access level. a fact she had accepted as operational logic and never imagined she'd need to draw on in a building south of the loop with Voss moving through the dark corridor outside. The weight of it was different now. She registered that difference and filed it and moved forward. "The communications array," she said. "Can it reach the Liang family?" Roman looked at her sharply. Vincent Liang was at the meeting today. The Liang family is under pressure from Voss, the same Voss that is currently moving on this location. They have operational interest in Voss being disrupted, and they have assets in the southern metro area that are closer to this position than anyone in your organization right now. She held his gaze. "Call them. I've known the Liangs for 3 weeks, and I called their bluff in that meeting today, and Vincent Liang looked at me like I'd passed something. Call them." Romain looked at her for one long second. Then he moved to the communications array, and she moved back to the terminal, and the air in the room had gone tight and thin, the way air goes in a closed space when everyone in it understands that the next 30 minutes will determine something final. Gideon came to stand beside her at the terminal. He looked at the map. He looked at the east wall access point she'd marked. Without comment, without anything in his face that she could read, he moved toward the east corridor and took a position in the shadow of the doorway where he had a sight line to the loading door, and his hands were steady, and his breathing was controlled. She heard Roman on the communications array. 2 sentences, Vincent Liang's name, a location code that she memorized automatically, and then the wait. 40 seconds. The communications array crackled. Vincent Liang's voice, compressed and dry through the encryption but recognizable, came through. Roman said, "Voss is moving on my position. South Industrial Corridor, Grid 4. I need 30 minutes. Vincent said 3 words. "How many men?" Roman looked at her. 7 minimum, she said. "Probably 9. Roman relayed it. Vincent's voice came back. 15 minutes. The line closed. She exhaled through her nose. Then the east wall shuddered. Not loudly. It was a heavy steel loading door and it absorbed impact, but the shudder translated through the floor, a vibration she felt through her shoes before she consciously registered the sound. Gideon was already in motion, pressing flat against the east corridor wall, weapon up. Roman crossed the room in 4 steps and pulled her behind the secondary terminal housing. Solid steel chassis, the kind of cover that was cover rather than concealment. And she went without argument because the geometry of the room said he was right. "How many doors between us and them?" he said low, right beside her ear. 2. The loading door and the corridor access. She was already counting. The corridor access has a deadbolt. "Gideon, already locked," Gideon said from the darkness of the east corridor. His voice was completely flat. "The loading door won't hold long. It's rated for freight, not forced entry." The shuddering came again, harder this time, something mechanical behind it now. Not just impact, but the specific rhythmic force of a breaching tool. She had never heard that sound before in her life, and she understood it instantly anyway, the way the body understands certain sounds before the mind catches up. "They're not trying to be quiet," she said. "No," Roman said. "They don't care if we know they're here." "No. That means they think they have enough to contain us completely, all 3 exits." His jaw was against her temple, almost, his body close and positioned between her and the east corridor, and she felt his breathing, steady, controlled, slower than hers, the breathing of a man who had been in enough rooms like this that his body had learned to run cold rather than hot in them. "Roman," she said it very quietly. "The roof access. I know. If they have the adjacent building, they'll breach from above after the loading door goes. 2-point entry. They'll want to separate us." "I know. So we don't let them separate us." He turned his head and looked at her. Just a degree, just enough. And she saw his face in the dim light of the terminal screens, and it was not the closed operational version, and it was not the version from last night in the locked office. It was something between the two and underneath both of them, something stripped all the way down, something that a room with a breaching tool at the door and 9 men outside had scraped the surface off of and left bare. "If this goes wrong," he started. "It won't." "Vivian." "It won't," she said again, harder. "I didn't stay so it could go wrong." He held her gaze. The loading door gave its 3rd shudder, and this time she heard the seam, a metallic groan of the deadbolt housing beginning to separate from the frame. the specific sound of a thing that was not designed to hold against this kind of sustained force finding the edge of what it could hold. From the roof, above them, a sound. Soft. Almost nothing. Footsteps on industrial roofing material, careful and distributed. The way trained men moved across a surface they were trying to be quiet on while also being fast. "They're above us," Gideon said. "I hear it," Roman said. The corridor between them and Gideon was 4 meters. The roof access hatch was in the room beyond the secondary communications bay. She had clocked it when they came in. Old habit, always clock the exits. If someone came through that hatch in the next 60 seconds, and Gideon was still positioned at the east corridor for the loading door breach. "Gideon!" Her voice came out steady. "The hatch." A pause. She could feel him calculating the same geometry she was. Loading door or hatch? Which came first? Which posed the greater immediate risk? What it cost to abandon one position for the other? "Loading door is closer," he said. "If they breach the hatch first, they have a position above us in the secondary bay. They'll have the high ground on the corridor and you lose your cover entirely." Another pause, shorter. "Move," Roman said. She heard Gideon shift, controlled, fast, the movement of a man realigning his position in a dark corridor with complete economy. The loading door was still holding, barely, the housing giving millimeters with each impact. The footsteps above them had stopped, which was worse than movement. Stopped meant positioned. Positioned meant ready. She looked at the terminal screen still active behind her. The Voss personnel map was still open. She looked at it and something caught. A notation she had passed over in the rush. A detail in the beta team's last documented operational summary that she had filed and not retrieved until now. Standing behind a steel chassis with a weapon she'd never used outside a range and the sound of a breaching tool on the other side of a wall. "Roman," she grabbed his arm. "The beta team commander. Voss's beta team commander." "What about him?" "His name is in the file. Eric Sauer. He was documented 8 months ago as the mobile operations lead." She looked at him. 8 months ago is when Reeves was first approached. Roman's eyes sharpened. Sauer is not just the team commander. He's the handler. He's the one who ran the Reeves operation from the beginning. She felt the pieces lock into place with the particular cold clarity of a pattern finally completing itself. Which means Sauer is personally invested in this operation in a way that goes beyond the assignment. If we can get Sauer, we can get everything Voss has built on us for 8 months, Roman said. Leverage. Real leverage. Not just surviving tonight. Leverage that ends this. He looked at her. The terminal light caught the side of his face and she saw it working. The tactical mind that had built and held an empire running the calculation at full speed, weighing the risk of the position they were in against the potential of what she was describing. "Sauer is outside," he said. "He'll be outside. A handler doesn't breach. He manages the operation from a contained position with sightlines to all 3 access points." She looked at the map. If the adjacent building has roof access and Voss has men on that roof, Sauer is in a vehicle on the north side of the property with communications to all 3 teams. He doesn't go in until it's over. "So we go out." "We go out." Gideon's voice came from the secondary bay, flat and taut. Hatches moving. The loading door shuddered again, and this time the housing gave. She heard the screws pull from the frame, the specific sound of metal losing its anchor, the groan of a door about to become an opening. Roman grabbed her hand. Not gently. His grip was iron and certain, and he pulled her upright, and she moved with him because there was no alternative. And also because she had said she stayed and she had meant it. And this was what staying looked like in this building on this night, with the door coming apart and the hatch above them opening, and the 15 minutes Vincent Liang had promised running down in the dark. "There's a side panel," Roman said, moving fast through the central corridor. "North wall, behind the first storage unit. It's not a door, it's a maintenance access, 18 inches, no external marking." "You built a 4th exit," she said. "I built a 4th exit." He pulled the storage unit aside with one hand. It was on rollers, she realized, designed for exactly this. Nothing in this building was accidental. And behind it was a panel, flush with the wall, a simple push-release mechanism. Behind them, the loading door gave completely. The metallic crash of it, the voices coming through, controlled, professional, men who did this for a living. And simultaneously from the secondary bay, the sound of the hatch dropping, boots on the floor above them, and Gideon's voice saying one word. Go. Roman hit the panel. Cold air. A gap, narrow, concrete on both sides, the maintenance channel between this building and the next running north. Barely lit. A single safety light every 20 feet, yellow and dim. She went through first because he pushed her, and she went without argument. He came through behind her. The panel reseated automatically. She heard it click back into flush position. From the other side, almost nothing. The gap swallowed sound. They ran. The channel was narrow enough that she had to turn her shoulders slightly. The concrete walls close on both sides. The safety lights passing overhead in a rhythm that matched her own breathing. In, past the light, out, past the dark, in again. Roman was half a step behind her, close enough that she felt the heat off him even in the cold channel air, and his footfalls were almost silent. The discipline of a man who had learned at some point in his life how to run without sounding like he was running. The north end of the channel had a vertical ladder, 8 feet up to a street-level access plate. She went up first. The plate was heavy, and she hit it with both palms, and it swung up, and cold Chicago night air hit her face, and she was out and pulling herself onto a concrete loading apron in the dark of the building's north side. Roman was out beside her in seconds. They were crouched against the building's north face, out of the immediate sightlines from the south and east. Across the open ground, 40 feet of gravel and sparse lighting, she could see the access road that ran north of the property. And on that access road, parked at the northern corner with its engine running and its lights off, a black vehicle with a single occupant visible through the windshield. She looked at Roman. He looked at the vehicle. Sour, she said. He was already moving. She was already with him. 40 feet of open ground between them and the man who held 8 months of intelligence on Roman Devereaux's empire, the man who had built the operation that had killed Marcus Chen and run Thomas Reeves and brought 9 men to a building south of the Loop on a Friday night. The gravel crunched once under her foot, and the figure in the vehicle, the gravel crunched once under her foot, and Eric Sauer moved. Not fast enough. Roman was already at the vehicle's driver's side before Sauer had his hand on the door release, and the sound of the window going down was not a choice Sauer made. It was the result of Roman's hand finding the door handle and pulling it open with the particular force of a man who had been running through a maintenance channel in the cold and had arrived at the end of his patience for anything that wasn't finished. Sauer was 50, heavy-set, with the look of a man who had spent his career managing operations from contained positions. The handler's build, soft at the edges, nothing like the men he sent through doors. He had a communications earpiece in his left ear and a phone in his right hand, and his face, in the moment the door came open, went through 4 distinct configurations before settling on something that was trying to be neutral and not quite making it. Roman reached in and took the phone. Hands on the wheel, he said. Sauer put his hands on the wheel. Vivian came around to the passenger side and got in. She kept the weapon in her right hand and her eyes on Sauer's profile and her breathing measured. Her knees were shaking. Not from fear, she understood, but from the adrenaline of the run, the body's chemical response to what the last 4 minutes had asked of it. She pressed her feet flat against the floor and held still, and the shaking stopped. Sauer looked at her, then at Roman, then at the phone Roman was holding. The building is already compromised, Sauer said. His voice was controlled, professionally controlled, the voice of a man trained to maintain composure as a function of his role. My teams will find it empty and recalibrate. You've bought yourself 20 minutes, maybe 30. I only need 10, Roman said. He was looking at the phone. He had pulled up the communications log. She could see it from the passenger seat, the screen's light catching his face. You've been running Reeves for 8 months. Sauer said nothing. You came to him through his daughter. Roman's voice was very quiet. A 12-year-old girl. Operational leverage is... I know what it is. Roman looked up from the phone. I want to know what Voss has built on me from 8 months of Reeves's data, not the summary, everything. I'm not going to... Eric. Roman said the name the way he said names that mattered, flat, without ornament, all the weight in the plainness of it. You are sitting in a vehicle with me on a property where your teams are currently finding an empty building. The Liang family has 12 men in this corridor right now. I know this because I called Vincent Liang 14 minutes ago, and Vincent Liang is a man who pays his debts quickly. He held Sauer's gaze. You have no operational support within useful range. You have no leverage. What you have is a choice about how the next 10 minutes go, and I am asking you, once, to make the intelligent one. Sauer looked at him for a long moment. She watched him calculate. The same calculation she had watched Reeves perform, but colder, more experienced, the calculation of a man who had made this kind of assessment professionally for 20 years and knew precisely what the variables added up to. He talked. It took 9 minutes. He was precise and organized about it. The handlers training, even now, even here, structuring information efficiently. 8 months of Reeves's data had given Voss a detailed map of Roman's communication routing, operational scheduling, and financial distribution channels. They had identified 7 pressure points in the organization's structure, weak nodes where targeted disruption could create cascading failures. They had been preparing to move on 3 of them simultaneously within the next 60 days. She listened and filed every word. When Sauer finished, he looked at the phone in Roman's hand and then at Roman's face, and he said, "What happens now?" Roman looked at her. She looked back at him. She thought about Marcus Chen, who was dead in a parking structure because Thomas Reeves had been leveraged through his daughter, and because Eric Sauer had been the man holding that lever. She thought about the resignation letter at the bottom of a trash bin. She thought about the car outside the building on Thursday night, already there before any of it happened, already in position. Voss's calculation already running while she stood in a locked office trying to say goodbye. "The Liang family takes him," she said. Sauer's head turned toward her sharply. "Not permanently," she said. "Long enough for us to close the 3 pressure points and restructure the channels Reeves compromised. 60 days. 70, to be safe." She looked at Roman. Vincent Liang has direct conflict with Voss. Holding Sauer gives Liang leverage against Voss's Eastern operations while we rebuild ours. It serves both organizations, and it keeps Sauer contained it keeps him contained. The pause before the last part was small. Sauer heard it. He understood what it replaced. Roman looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded once. He made a call. 6 minutes later, 2 vehicles arrived from the south end of the access road. Vincent Liang's men were quiet and efficient, and they took Sauer from the vehicle without dramatics, and Sauer went without resistance because he was a man who understood when a calculation was complete. Before they put him in the vehicle, Sauer looked back at Vivian. His expression was not hostile. It carried something she had not expected, a kind of professional assessment, the same quality she had felt from Vincent Liang at the end of the meeting, the recognition of competence arriving from an unexpected direction. He didn't say anything. He got in the vehicle. The Liang cars left. The access road was empty. She stood in the cold with gravel under her shoes and the night air coming off the industrial corridor and her weapon still in her hand and Roman standing 3 feet away looking at the space where the vehicles had been. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped somewhere during Sauer's 9 minutes. She didn't know exactly when. She looked at the weapon in her hand and then she looked at Roman. "Gideon," she said. "Already called." He held up his phone. She hadn't seen him dial, but she understood she had missed things in the last 20 minutes. Her attention distributed too many ways. He got out through the central corridor. 2 of Voss's men came through the hatch, and he's functional. He'll need a doctor. She absorbed that. Functional. The word doing careful work around whatever functional meant in this specific context. How bad? He didn't say, which means not good. They moved. Roman had the Chevy. Gideon had left it on the north approach, which had not been in Voss's breach plan, which meant it was still there. She got in the passenger side and Roman drove, and she sat with her hands in her lap and the night city moving past the windows and the particular silence of 2 people who had just come through something and not yet begun to process what it cost. Gideon was 3 blocks east, standing against a wall in a service alley, jacket pressed against his left side. When the headlights found him, she saw the dark stain on the jacket, and her chest did something sharp and immediate. Roman was out of the car before it fully stopped. She was right behind him. Gideon was upright, and his face was composed in the specific way of a man managing serious pain through will rather than absence of feeling. Jaw set, breathing shallow and deliberate, eyes tracking them as they approached. The jacket was soaked through on the left side from mid-rib to hip. "It went through," he said before either of them asked. "I checked, both sides. It's not—" He stopped, breathed. "It's not structural. I know what structural feels like. This isn't that. You've been shot before," she said. She didn't know why she said it like that, like a fact she was confirming rather than a horror she was absorbing. "Once," he said. "Same side, different location." He looked at Roman. "The Voss teams are going to regroup within the hour. We need you in a car," Roman said. He got a shoulder under Gideon's right arm, and Gideon accepted it without comment, which told her the pain was worse than his voice was managing to communicate. They got him into the back seat. She got in beside him and pressed her hand against the jacket where his was, adding pressure, and he looked at her with an expression she had no file for. Not gratitude exactly, something older and less comfortable than gratitude. Something that looked like a man revising a long-held position about another person and finding the revision painful in more ways than the obvious one. "I told you this morning you'd make everything more complicated," he said. His voice was strained, but it was there. "You also said I'd make it stronger," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he closed his eyes and leaned his head back, and she kept the pressure on, and Roman drove, and the city moved past them in the dark. The doctor was 40 minutes away. Not a hospital, a private physician who asked nothing and documented nothing and had been part of Roman's infrastructure for years. Gideon was in the physician's care by 1:15 in the morning, stable, the wound serious but survivable, which was the only category that mattered. She and Roman sat in the corridor outside the physician's operating room on a bench that was the same kind of bench that appeared in every corridor like this, utilitarian, specific to nothing, built for waiting. She was aware, sitting there, of everything that had not been processed yet. The weight of it was enormous, and she was holding it at arm's length through the particular discipline of a woman who had been managing crises for 4 years and knew that the processing happened after the crisis and not during it. But the crisis was over now, or the acute version of it was over, and the processing was beginning to move in despite her discipline, through the cracks. Marcus Chen was dead. She had not known Marcus Chen well. Professionally, carefully, in the specific register of two people who worked in proximity to a dangerous man and had developed a mutual careful respect. She had known the way he drank his coffee and the measured quality of his warnings and the particular shorthand he'd used when he flagged something for her attention. She had known him 4 years. She put her hands on her knees and looked at the floor. Roman sat beside her. He hadn't spoken since the physician had closed the door. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of him. That quality of his presence that occupied space differently than other people. Something in the density of it, the particular gravity. "The 7 pressure points Sauer described," she said. She kept her voice low, not because anyone was listening, but because the corridor at 1:15 a.m. demanded it. "I can close 4 of them from the current file structure, rerouting the communication channels, restructuring 3 of the distribution nodes. The other 3 are more complex. They'll need operational changes that take time." Roman looked at her. "I can have a plan drafted by Monday," she said. He kept looking at her. "Roman." "Stop," he said. She stopped. "I know you can have a plan drafted by Monday." His voice was quiet. "I know you can close the pressure points and restructure the channels and have the entire organization running cleaner than it was before Reeves by the end of the month." He held her gaze. "I know all of that. You don't have to prove it to me right now. You've been proving things to this organization since 9 this morning, and it is now 1:15 a.m. And Gideon is in that room, and Marcus Chen is—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "Marcus," she said, "yes." She had not heard Roman Devereaux's voice break before. It didn't fully break now. He did not allow it to go that far. The architecture of him was too entrenched for that. But something cracked in the word. Something small and real, and not managed. Marcus had been with him for 6 years, longer than her, younger than almost anyone else in the inner circle, careful and precise and loyal in the way that young men are loyal when they believe fully in what they're doing. She did not say anything. She put her hand over his on the bench between them and held it. Just that. No words, because words were the wrong instrument for this particular grief. The grief of a man who had built something and lost a piece of it that couldn't be rebuilt. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a long time. The physician came out at 2:45 and told them Gideon was stable and sleeping and would need 3 weeks of limited activity, which Roman received with a nod that communicated he understood, and also that 3 weeks was an optimistic timeline given current circumstances. The physician, who had known Roman long enough to read that nod, said, 4 weeks minimum, or I won't be responsible for what reopens. Roman nodded again. The physician went back inside. She and Roman left the building at 3 a.m. and stood on the empty street outside, and the city was quiet in the specific way of very late nights. Not silent, Chicago was never silent, but reduced, the daytime frequency replaced by something slower and more honest. The Reeves girl, she said. Gideon's team moved her before we left the building. She and her mother are in a secure location. He looked at the street. They'll stay there until the Voss situation is fully resolved. And Reeves, a pause. He'll answer for what he did. He'll also be allowed to do it in a way that doesn't leave his daughter without a father. He said it without looking at her, and she heard in it the echo of what she'd said in the conference room, the choice she'd named, the 12-year-old girl who had no stake in any of it. He had heard her. He had carried it through everything that followed and acted on it, not because she'd softened him, but because she'd articulated something that was already in him, and he had allowed it to matter. That distinction was important to her. She held it. What do you want to do? She said. He turned and looked at her. Tonight, she clarified. Do you want to go back to the building or... No, he said. Not tonight. She nodded. There's a place on the north side, he said. Not organizational, mine. I've kept it separate from everything. He looked at her. I'd like to take you there. She thought about the brownstone the night before, the clean sheets and the ceiling she'd stared at, and the 4 hours of not sleeping. She thought about the 42nd floor and the locked office, and the resignation letter, and all the architecture of distance she had built and maintained for 4 years, and then surrendered in a single night. All right, she said, the same 2 words she kept returning to. They had become, she was beginning to understand, the most honest thing she knew how to say. He took her there. It was a narrow house on a quiet street, the north side of the city where the buildings got older and more particular, and the lake was close enough to smell. Inside it was nothing like the penthouse. No glass walls, no polished surfaces, no evidence of empire. Books again, because Roman always had books. A kitchen that had been cooked in. Furniture chosen for durability rather than presentation. The accumulated evidence of a man who existed privately in a different register than his public one. She stood in the middle of the front room and looked at it. You've had this for years, she said. 12 years. You've never brought anyone here. No. She turned and looked at him. He was standing in the doorway between the entry and the front room, jacket gone somewhere between the car and here, shirt untucked, the evidence of the night's violence visible in small ways. A bruise forming at his left jaw where something had connected in the maintenance channel. A cut across his right knuckle she hadn't noticed until now. He looked like what he was. Not the empire, not the reputation, not the particular performance of authority that the 42nd floor required. Just a man who had been through something hard and had brought someone he trusted to the only space he'd ever kept entirely for himself. She crossed the room and put her hand against the side of his face. Her thumb traced the bruise forming at his jaw, and she felt him hold very still under her hand, not pulling back, but not moving toward her either. Just accepting it. Just letting himself be touched by someone who knew everything he'd built and everything it had cost, and was standing here anyway. I need to tell you something, he said. Low. Tell me. I've been running since I was 22 years old. This organization, this life. I built it because it was the only thing I knew how to build, and I've held it because I'm the only person who knows exactly how it's held. His eyes held hers. I have never, in 12 years of this house, in 15 years of this organization, I have never brought anyone into the center of it the way I brought you tonight. The resignation letter, she said. Before the letter, before last night. You've been in the center of it for a long time. You've been in the center of me for a long time. His voice carried the specific difficulty of a man saying true things in plain language, each word costing something. I just couldn't say it, she said. He looked at her. I was afraid of what it would cost you, what this life would cost you. He said it like a stone dropping. I watched you manage everything and protect everything, and I knew what you were worth, and I knew what this world does to the things that matter to the people inside it. Marcus, what happened tonight? That is the cost, Vivian. That is what I was trying to keep you from." She held his gaze. "You didn't get to make that choice for me," she said. "I know. I made it. Last night I made it, and tonight I made it again, every minute of it." She kept her voice steady. "You don't get to protect me from the life I chose. You get to stand next to me in it." He looked at her for a long time in the quiet house with the city reduced to almost nothing outside the windows. Then something in his face, all of it, all the architecture of control and management, and the particular loneliness of a man who had kept everyone at the distance required by fear, came down. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just the slow release of something held too long, the way a structure settles after the load-bearing stress is redistributed. He leaned his forehead against hers and closed his eyes, and she felt his exhale, so long, slow, the breathing of a man who had been holding something for years and was finally, in this room on this night, allowed to put it down. She didn't say anything. She put both hands against his face and held him. And the city breathed outside, and the house was quiet, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, things were rebuilt, and things were closed, and things were ended. The 7 pressure points Sauer had identified were addressed methodically. She drafted the plan on Sunday, not Monday. She'd been wrong about her own timeline, which Roman noted with a dry precision that was as close as he came to teasing. The communication channels were restructured. 3 distribution nodes were reconfigured. The financial architecture that Reeves had given Voss partial sightlines into was redesigned from the ground up. It took 4 weeks. She did most of it herself, with Marcus gone and the operational staff reduced by the necessary removal of 2 others whose peripheral contact with Reeves's channel had made them compromised. She worked long hours at a desk that was still hers, on a floor that still carried the particular weight of what had happened, and she did the work because the work was real and the work was what she was good at, and because every closed vulnerability was a version of the answer to Roman's fear. Proof that the center could hold, proof that the cost, while real, was not final. Gideon came back in 5 weeks, not 4, because the physician had been right and Roman had been wrong, which Gideon delivered as information to Roman with the contained satisfaction of a man who did not often get to be right when Roman was wrong. He came back changed in small ways she catalogued without comment. A fractional reduction in the resistance she had felt from him since the beginning, a quality of attention in his interactions with her that was different from the cautious professional neutrality of before. Not warmth, exactly. Gideon Cross did not do warmth, but something that functioned like respect operating without conditions. On a Friday evening, 6 weeks after the night in the industrial corridor, Roman brought the senior operational staff together. Not in the conference room, in the main floor where the whole team could be present. She stood beside him, not behind him, not to the side, but beside, and he said what he said without preamble or ceremony, that the organization's structure was changing, that Vivian Hartwell was no longer the executive coordinator, that her role, from this point, was operational partner with full strategic authority, that any question about that authority could be directed to him or, in his absence, to Gideon Cross. He did not explain further. He did not require approval. He stated it the way he stated things that were decided, with the complete absence of uncertainty that was either arrogance or absolute conviction, and in Roman's case was most often both simultaneously. She looked at the room. She had spent 4 years learning the faces in it, every tell, every alignment, every quiet coalition and long-standing tension. She read them now and found what she expected. Some immediate, some slower, 1 or 2 still running their calculations. Gideon stood to her left and said nothing, and his silence carried weight in the room the way it always did, and his silence was unambiguous. Nobody spoke against it. Afterward, in his office, her office now, in the sense that she had always inhabited it and now the inhabiting was formal, Roman set a small object on her desk. She looked at it, a key. She looked up at him. "To the house," he said. "The north side." She picked it up. The same weight as the other key, almost nothing, just metal, just a small physical object that contained a different version of an enormous thing. "You're not a very subtle man," she said. "No," he said. She held the key in her palm and looked at it. and she thought about the resignation letter and the Thursday night and the 4 years of architecture she had built to keep herself at the correct distance from this man and this life. And she thought about Marcus Chen, who was gone, and Gideon Cross, who had taken a bullet in a maintenance corridor, and Thomas Reeves's daughter in a safe house, and Eric Sauer in the custody of the Liang family, and the bruise she had traced on Roman's jaw in a quiet house at 3 a.m. And she thought about what it meant to choose something knowing the full cost of it and choosing it anyway. Not because the cost was acceptable, but because the alternative was a life conducted from just outside the frame of everything that mattered. She closed her hand around the key. "I want to change 2 of the distribution nodes we restructured," she said. "The current configuration is functional but not optimal. I found a better architecture." Roman leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, looking at her. "Show me," he said. She opened the file. Outside, the city went about its business in the particular way of cities that have no knowledge of individual lives, indifferent, continuous, the streets running their patterns and the lake sitting cold and flat at the eastern edge of it all. In the months ahead, there would be more pressure and more decisions and more rooms where the stakes were the specific kind that could not be abstracted. That was the nature of the life they had chosen. Neither of them had illusions about that. But in the office on the 42nd floor, in the gray afternoon light with the lake visible at the edge of the skyline, 2 people sat side by side at a desk and looked at a file together, and the file was real, and the work was real. And what existed between them was the most honest thing either of them had ever built. Not despite the cost, not in ignorance of it, but forged directly through the center of everything it had required. The empire was theirs. They had both earned it. And for the first time in as long as either of them could remember, that was exactly enough.